Bang, bang, bang! The desperate pounding shattered the silence of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's clinic. Through the howling Arizona storm, a voice called out in pain-laced English, "Please, I am dying!" Sarah's heart raced. Who would be out in this violent tempest? She grabbed her medical bag and rushed to the door. When she opened it, lightning illuminated a figure that made her gasp. A Native American man stood bleeding in her doorway, his powerful frame swaying dangerously. Rain mixed with blood streamed down his weathered face, but his dark eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through her soul. This was no ordinary man seeking help. "Help me," he whispered, then collapsed forward into her arms. Sarah caught him, struggling under his weight. Blood soaked through his buckskin shirt, warm and sticky against her hands. "Dear God, what happened to you?" But as she helped him inside, something chilled her beyond the storm. Pinned to his torn shirt was a small silver medallion, the kind worn by Apache war leaders. Her blood ran cold. If the soldiers found an Apache warrior in her clinic— "Bullet!" he gasped, pressing his hand to his side. 3 days, getting worse. Sarah's medical training overrode her fear. She guided him to the examination bed, her mind racing. "I need to see the wound. Can you tell me your name?" The man's eyes met hers with calculating intelligence. For a moment she saw something flicker there, authority, command, danger. Then his expression softened. "Joe. You can call me Joe." Something about the way he said it told Sarah this was not his real name, but there was something else. The way he carried himself despite his pain, the unconscious dignity in his posture. This man was accustomed to being obeyed. As she cut away his shirt, Sarah discovered the horrifying truth. The bullet wound was severely infected, the surrounding skin hot and inflamed. Without immediate surgery, he would die within hours. "This is very bad," she said, preparing her instruments. "The bullet is still inside. I have to operate now." Joe nodded grimly. "I heard the woman doctor in Cedar Ridge treats all people, even enemies of the United States." The words hung in the air like a confession. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she prepared the laudanum. An enemy of the United States? Just who was this man bleeding on her table? "I treat anyone who needs help," she said carefully, handing him the painkiller. "That's my oath." As Joe drank the laudanum, Sarah noticed his hands, scarred from countless battles, calloused from handling weapons. These were the hands of a warrior, someone who had killed to survive. Yet when he looked at her, there was genuine gratitude in his eyes. "You are brave, Dr. Sarah Mitchell," he said, using her full name, though she had not given it. "Braver than you know." How did he know her name? Sarah's pulse quickened, but she forced herself to focus on the surgery. As she worked to extract the bullet, Joe endured the pain in stoic silence. Most men would have screamed, but he barely flinched. "You have done this before," Joe observed, watching her steady hands. "Removed bullets from men like me." "What do you mean, men like you?" Sarah asked, carefully probing for the bullet. "Men who fight for their people, men who refuse to surrender." The word sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Stories of Apache raids filled the territorial newspapers. Reports of a legendary leader who had escaped reservations multiple times, leading his warriors in a desperate fight for freedom. Could this man be? The bullet came free with a metallic clink. As Sarah cleaned the wound, she noticed something that made her heart stop. Across Joe's chest were 3 distinctive scars, old bullet wounds in a pattern she had heard described before. According to Army reports, the Apache leader Geronimo bore identical scars from a battle years earlier. Her hands shook as she applied the bandages. If this man was truly Geronimo, the most wanted man in the American Southwest, then she was harboring the enemy of every settler, soldier, and rancher in the territory. The bounty on his head could feed a family for years. "Doctor," Joe said softly, noticing her distress, "you have saved my life tonight. That makes you my friend, whatever happens tomorrow." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw something that surprised her. Genuine kindness beneath the warrior's facade. This was not the savage monster described in newspapers. This was a man fighting for his people's survival. "Rest now," she whispered. "We'll worry about tomorrow when it comes." As Joe's eyes closed under the laudanum's influence, Sarah sat beside him in the lamplight. Outside, the storm was finally weakening, but inside her clinic, a much more dangerous tempest was brewing. If soldiers came looking for Geronimo and found him here, they would both face the hangman's noose. But as she watched him sleep, this proud, wounded warrior who had trusted her with his life, Sarah realized she had already made her choice. She had sworn an oath to heal, not to judge. Whatever his past, whatever his crimes, tonight he was simply a man who needed her help. The question was, what would she do when morning came? Thunder rumbled in the distance as the storm moved on, but Sarah knew the real storm was just beginning. Soon she would have to decide between her loyalty to her country and her loyalty to the man whose life she had just saved. A man who might be the legendary Geronimo himself. The candle flickered in the draught, casting dancing shadows across Joe's peaceful face. In sleep he looked younger, almost vulnerable, but Sarah had seen the steel in his eyes, felt the coiled strength in his body. This was a man who commanded other men, who made life-and-death decisions every day. As dawn approached, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah made a silent promise. Whatever came next, she would not betray the trust this mysterious warrior had placed in her, even if it cost her everything. The question that haunted her as morning broke was simple. When the soldiers inevitably came looking for Geronimo, would she have the courage to look them in the eye and lie? Time would tell. But first, she had to keep her patient alive long enough to discover the truth about who he really was. Outside, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the muddy streets of Cedar Ridge. Soon, the town would wake up, and Sarah's quiet life as a frontier doctor would be changed forever, because sleeping in her clinic was either an innocent Apache seeking help or the most dangerous man in America. The first rays of dawn crept through the clinic windows when Joe's eyes suddenly snapped open. Alert, focused, like a predator sensing danger. "Doctor," he whispered urgently. "Soldiers, coming!" Sarah's heart stopped. She had been dozing in her chair, exhausted from the night's surgery. "How can you possibly know that?" Joe was already sitting up, ignoring the pain from his wound. His hearing, sharpened by years of survival, had caught the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats. 12 horses, maybe 15. They will be here soon. The terror in Sarah's chest grew. If soldiers found Geronimo in her clinic, they would both hang. "Can you move? There's a back room." "No." Joe's voice carried absolute authority. "If they search and find where I hid, you will be accused of helping me escape. Better that I'm here, appearing as just another patient." His tactical thinking impressed and frightened her. This was definitely not an ordinary Apache warrior. "But if you're really Geronimo," Joe finished, studying her face carefully, "would that change how you treat me, Dr. Sarah?" The question hung between them like a blade. Sarah looked into his dark eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Vulnerability beneath the warrior's mask. This legendary fighter, this supposed monster, was asking if she would still see him as human. "No," she said firmly. "A patient is a patient." Something shifted in Joe's expression. Surprise, respect, perhaps even gratitude. "You are remarkable, Doctor." Most whites would have already run screaming to the fort. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder. Sarah quickly checked Joe's bandages, her hands trembling. "Lie down. Pretend to be unconscious. I'll tell them you're a local ranch hand who was shot by bandits." "They will not believe that story," Joe said calmly. "I am obviously Apache." "Then what do you suggest?" Joe smiled grimly. "The truth. Tell them an injured Apache came seeking help, and you treated him because you are a doctor. Let them draw their own conclusions about who I am." Before Sarah could respond, heavy boots stomped across her front porch. A commanding voice shouted, "Dr. Mitchell! Open up! Official army business!" Sarah smoothed her dress and walked to the door, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the soldiers would hear it. She opened the door to find 12 cavalry soldiers, their blue uniforms dusty from hard riding. Their leader, a captain with cold grey eyes and a brutal scar across his left cheek, stepped forward. "Captain Robert Hayes, United States Cavalry," he announced. We're tracking Apache raiders who attacked a supply wagon 3 days ago. We have reports that one of them was wounded. Sarah forced her voice to remain steady. Good morning, Captain. How can I help you? We need to search your clinic, Doctor. The wounded Apache may have sought medical attention. Of course, Sarah said, stepping aside. Though I should warn you, I do have a patient resting inside. Captain Hayes's eyes narrowed with interest. What kind of patient? An Apache man. He arrived last night during the storm with a severe bullet wound. I removed the bullet and treated the infection. The captain's hand moved to his sidearm. Is he conscious? In and out, Sarah lied smoothly. The laudanum and blood loss have kept him mostly unconscious. Hayes motioned to his men, and they filed into the clinic. Sarah led them to where Joe lay on the examination bed, his eyes closed, breathing shallow and regular. To anyone watching, he appeared to be a gravely injured man, barely clinging to life. Captain Hayes studied Joe's face carefully. Sergeant Morrison, what do you think? Could this be our man? A grizzled sergeant examined Joe closely. Hard to say, sir. All these Apache look the same to me, but this one's pretty beaten up. Might not be the fighter we're looking for. The man we're hunting is dangerous, Doctor, Hayes said to Sarah. The most wanted Apache in the territory. If this is him, who exactly are you looking for? Sarah asked, praying her voice sounded casual. Geronimo, Hayes spat the name like a curse. The butcher himself. He's been raiding settlements, killing families, stealing livestock. The government has put a $5,000 bounty on his head. $5,000. Sarah tried not to react to the enormous sum. That was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Joe remained perfectly still, but Sarah noticed the slightest tightening around his eyes. He was listening to every word. This man told me his name was Joe, Sarah said truthfully. He was delirious from fever and blood loss. I focused on saving his life, not interrogating him. Captain Hayes approached the bed. Joe, is it? Convenient name for an Apache. He leaned closer to Joe's face. I've seen sketches of Geronimo. This man has the right build, the right age. Sarah's pulse raced. Would Hayes recognize him? But Geronimo has distinctive scars across his chest, the sergeant added. Battle wounds from fighting Mexican soldiers years ago. If this is him, he'd have those marks. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had seen those exact scars when treating Joe's wound. 3 parallel lines across his chest, old bullet wounds that had healed into raised, distinctive marks. Hayes reached for Joe's blanket. Let's have a look. Captain, Sarah stepped forward quickly. This man is gravely ill. Exposing him to cold air could worsen his condition and cause the wound to reopen. As his physician, I cannot allow it. Hayes paused, his hand hovering over the blanket. Doctor, this is a matter of national security. If this man is Geronimo, then he's not going anywhere in his current condition, Sarah interrupted. He can barely breathe, let alone escape. You can post guards if you're concerned. The captain studied her face suspiciously. You seem awfully protective of an Apache raider, Doctor. I'm protective of all my patients, Captain. It's called the Hippocratic Oath. For a tense moment, Hayes seemed ready to push the issue. Then one of his soldiers called from the door. Captain! Rider approaching! Looks like dispatch from the fort! Hayes reluctantly stepped away from the bed. A young soldier rode up with urgent news. Captain Hayes, Colonel Morrison orders you to proceed immediately to Willow Creek. Apache war party spotted heading north. All available troops needed for pursuit. The captain cursed under his breath. How many Apache? 20 or more, sir. They hit the Anderson Ranch this morning. Hayes looked back at Joe, clearly torn between following orders and investigating his suspicions. Doctor, if this man's condition improves, you will notify the fort immediately. Is that understood? Of course, Captain, Sarah agreed. And Doctor, Hayes added, his voice carrying a clear threat, harboring enemies of the United States is a hanging offense. I trust you understand the consequences of poor judgment. After the soldiers left, Sarah collapsed into her chair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Joe opened his eyes and looked at her with something approaching admiration. You saved my life twice now, he said quietly. Once with your surgery and once with your courage. I couldn't let them. Sarah struggled for words. You could not let them what? Capture Geronimo. Sarah met his eyes directly. Are you really him? Joe was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Then he slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position, wincing from the pain of his wound. With deliberate movements, he pulled aside his shirt to reveal his chest. There they were, 3 distinctive scars, exactly as the sergeant had described, parallel lines from old bullet wounds, the marks that identified him beyond any doubt. "My name is Goyawe," he said quietly. "The Mexicans called me Geronimo. I am the last free leader of the Chiricahua Apache." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. The most wanted man in America was sitting in her clinic, trusting her with his identity, his life, his freedom. "Why?" she whispered. "Why tell me?" "Because you chose to see me as a man, not a monster. Because you risked everything to protect me without knowing who I was. That kind of courage deserves honesty. The things they say you've done, some are true," Geronimo admitted. "I have killed soldiers. I have raided settlements. But do you know why?" Sarah shook her head. "Because your government took my people's land. Because they forced us onto reservations where we starved and died of disease. Because they killed my family." His voice carried pain deeper than any physical wound. "My wife, my children, my mother, all murdered by Mexican soldiers while I was away trading. Everything I have done since that day was to protect what remains of my people." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. The newspapers never told this part of the story. They painted Geronimo as a savage, but they never explained what had driven him to violence. "I'm not saying I'm innocent," Geronimo continued. "War makes killers of us all, but I am not the monster your people believe me to be. I fight for the same thing any man would fight for, the right of my family to live free." "What will you do now?" Sarah asked. "Captain Hayes suspects who you are. He'll be back. I will heal, if you will let me, and then I will return to my people. But first," Geronimo looked directly into her eyes, "I must ask something difficult of you." "What?" "There are others like me. Wounded Apache warriors hiding in the mountains, afraid to seek help because they know most whites would turn them over to the army. If they came to you, I would treat them," Sarah said without hesitation. "Just as I treated you." Geronimo smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Then you are not just brave, Dr. Sarah. You are extraordinary." Over the next few hours, as Geronimo rested and Sarah tended his wound, she found herself learning about the man behind the legend. He spoke of his childhood, his training as a warrior, his deep love for his people and their traditional ways. He was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle when he wasn't fighting for survival. "Tell me about your life," Geronimo said, as Sarah changed his bandages. "Why did a woman become a doctor on the frontier?" Sarah found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone. Her father's death, her determination to bring healing to a violent land, her loneliness in a place where educated women were rare and often unwelcome. "You chose a hard path," Geronimo observed. "Like me, you fight for what you believe, even when others do not understand." As afternoon turned to evening, Sarah realized something profound was happening. She was falling under the spell of this remarkable man, not because he was the famous Geronimo, but because beneath the warrior's exterior was a human being of extraordinary depth and character. But their peaceful conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside. Voices, footsteps, the sound of horses. "Dr. Mitchell!" someone called. "We need your help." Sarah looked out the window and gasped. A group of Apache warriors had arrived, supporting 2 wounded men between them. They had come seeking the healing they had heard about, the white woman doctor who treated all people equally. Geronimo saw her expression and understood immediately. "My people," he said, "they trust you because I told them you could be trusted. But if Captain Hayes comes back, then we face that danger together," Geronimo said, struggling to his feet despite his pain. "Because some things are worth risking everything for." As Sarah opened her door to help the wounded Apache warriors, she realized her quiet life as a frontier doctor was over forever. She was now part of something much larger and far more dangerous. She was part of Geronimo's war. "Doctor, please!" The Apache warrior's desperate cry cut through the evening air like a blade. Sarah threw open her clinic door to find 5 Apache warriors supporting 2 critically wounded men. Blood soaked through makeshift bandages, and one of the injured was barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. Behind her, Geronimo struggled to his feet despite his own wounds. "Naiche," he called out in Apache, then switched to English for Sarah's benefit. "My nephew, what happened?" The lead warrior, a young man with fierce eyes and a fresh scar across his cheek, looked between Sarah and Geronimo with surprise. "Uncle, you are alive. We heard soldiers." "The doctor saved me," Geronimo said simply. "She can be trusted. Sarah, this is Naiche, son of Cochise. These men need your help." Sarah's mind raced. Treating one Apache was dangerous enough, but 6? If Captain Hayes returned now. But looking at the wounded men, her medical oath overrode her fear. "Bring them inside, quickly," she ordered, "before someone sees." As the warriors carried their injured comrades into the clinic, Sarah assessed the damage. The first man had taken a rifle bullet through his shoulder, the bone likely shattered. The second had been grazed by another bullet across his scalp, but was losing dangerous amounts of blood. "What happened?" Sarah asked as she began gathering supplies. Naiche's jaw tightened with rage. "Cavalry patrols surprised us while we were hunting. They opened fire without warning. These men are not warriors. They are hunters, trying to feed our families." "Hunters?" Sarah paused in her preparations. "You mean they weren't raiding?" "We have not raided in weeks," Geronimo said quietly. "We were trying to avoid conflict, hunting deer and gathering food for the winter. But the soldiers, they shoot first and ask questions later." Sarah felt sick. The army was hunting down Apache families, simply trying to survive. "The soldier said there was a raid this morning." "Lies," Naiche spat. "Or different Apache. We have been in the mountains for days, far from any settlements." As Sarah worked on the wounded men, she learned more about the reality of Apache life. These were not the savage killers portrayed in newspapers, but desperate people trying to survive in a world that wanted them dead or imprisoned. "Doctor," the man with the shoulder wound whispered in halting English. "My wife, she has new baby. If I die—" "You're not going to die," Sarah said firmly, cleaning his wound. "The bullet missed the major arteries. You'll heal." Hope flickered in the man's eyes. You help Apache, even though we are enemies." "You're not my enemy," Sarah replied. "You're a father worried about his family. That makes you human." Geronimo watched her work with growing admiration. "You see what others cannot see, Sarah Mitchell. You see our hearts, not just our skin." As Sarah operated by lamplight, removing bullet fragments and stitching wounds, the Apache warriors shared their stories. They spoke of children starving on reservations, of corrupt agents stealing government supplies meant for their people, of soldiers who killed Apache on sight, regardless of age or gender. "The reservation at San Carlos is a death trap," Naiche explained. "No game to hunt, crops that won't grow in the desert, water that makes people sick. We came to these mountains because staying meant watching our families die slowly. But the newspapers say—" "The newspapers lie," Geronimo said bluntly. "They tell your people what they want to hear, that we are monsters who deserve extinction. It makes killing us easier to justify." Sarah finished treating the wounded men and stepped back, exhausted. Both would live, though recovery would take weeks. "You have saved more Apache lives tonight than most white people save in a lifetime," Naiche said solemnly. "We will not forget this kindness." But their moment of relief was shattered by the sound of approaching horses. Many horses riding hard toward the clinic. "Soldiers," Geronimo said grimly, "more than before." Through the window, Sarah saw the nightmare approaching. At least 20 cavalry soldiers surrounded her clinic, with Captain Hayes leading them. Behind the soldiers rode a man in an expensive suit, clearly someone important from the territorial government. "Dr. Mitchell," Hayes shouted, "come out immediately. We know you're harboring Apache fugitives." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. 6 Apache warriors in her clinic, including the most wanted man in America. There was no way to hide them, no way to explain their presence. "What do we do?" she whispered to Geronimo. The great leader looked at his wounded nephew, then at the 2 injured hunters lying helpless on her examination tables, his face set in grim determination. "Naiche, take the others out the back, get to the horses and ride hard for Devil's Canyon." "No!" Naiche protested. "We don't leave you behind." "That's an order," Geronimo said with absolute authority. "I am wounded and slow. You are young and fast. Our people need you alive more than they need me. Uncle, go, now!" As the younger Apache warriors reluctantly prepared to leave with the wounded men, Geronimo turned to Sarah. "I am sorry for bringing this danger to you. You have shown me more kindness than I deserved." "You're not going to surrender," Sarah realized with growing horror. "I will not let them take me alive to be paraded like a circus animal," Geronimo said quietly. "And I will not let them hurt you for helping me. There has to be another way." "Dr. Mitchell!" Hayes shouted again. "You have 30 seconds to come out, or we're coming in." Geronimo checked his rifle. Though with his wounded side, he would not be able to fight effectively for long. "Tell them I forced you to treat me. Tell them I threatened to kill you if you refused." "I won't lie about that," Sarah said fiercely. "You didn't force me to do anything. I chose to help you because it was right." Something profound passed between them in that moment. Two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstances, finding an unexpected connection that transcended race and conflict. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known," Geronimo said softly. Before Sarah could respond, the clinic door exploded inward. Captain Hayes burst through with soldiers behind him, rifles raised and ready to fire. "Nobody move!" Hayes screamed. "Hands where I can see them!" Sarah raised her hands slowly, her heart pounding. Geronimo stood beside the examination bed, his own hands visible but near his rifle. "Well, well," came a cultured voice from behind the soldiers. The man in the expensive suit stepped forward, a territorial official with cold, calculating eyes. The famous Dr. Sarah Mitchell and her Apache patient. "Governor Wilson," Hayes said respectfully, "this is the woman I told you about." Governor Wilson studied Sarah with the look of a predator examining prey. "Doctor, you stand accused of providing aid and comfort to enemies of the United States. That's a capital offense." "I provided medical aid to wounded men," Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "That's my job." "Your job is to serve law-abiding citizens, not savage killers," Wilson sneered. He looked at Geronimo with obvious excitement. "And you, my Apache friend, do you know how much your capture is worth to my political career?" Geronimo said nothing, but Sarah could see him calculating distances, angles, his chances of fighting his way out. "Governor," she said quickly, "this man came to me dying. I took an oath to preserve life. An oath to preserve American lives," Wilson corrected. "Not the lives of murdering heathens." The racial slur hit Sarah like a physical blow. "He's a human being." "He's a terrorist," Wilson snapped, "responsible for the deaths of hundreds of innocent people." "And how many of his people have you killed?" Sarah shot back, her temper finally flaring. "How many Apache children have starved on your reservations while agents steal their food? How many families have been murdered by soldiers who shoot first and ask questions later?" Wilson's face darkened. "Careful, Doctor. Your sympathies are showing." "Yes, they are," Sarah said defiantly. "I sympathize with anyone who's been driven from their home, anyone who's watched their children starve, anyone who's fighting for the right to exist." "Enough!" Wilson barked. "Captain Hayes, arrest them both." As soldiers moved forward with shackles, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She stepped protectively in front of Geronimo. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me." The clinic fell silent except for the sound of rifles being cocked. Sarah faced down 20 armed soldiers with nothing but her moral courage. "Sarah, no," Geronimo said quietly. "Step aside. Do not sacrifice yourself for me." "I'm not sacrificing myself," Sarah replied firmly. "I'm standing up for what's right." Governor Wilson's laugh was cold and cruel. "How touching! The white doctor and her pet savage. You'll make quite a spectacle at your joint execution." But before anyone could move, a new sound cut through the tension, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Many hoofbeats coming fast. Through the clinic windows, everyone could see Apache warriors emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them surrounding the building, their rifles aimed at the soldiers. Naiche's voice rang out from the darkness. "Release our leader and the woman doctor, or you will all die tonight." The tables had turned. Now the soldiers were outnumbered and surrounded. Governor Wilson's face went pale. "How many are there?" "Enough," came Geronimo's calm reply. "My people do not abandon their own." Captain Hayes looked nervous for the first time. "Governor, we're in a bad position here. Maybe we should negotiate." "Never!" Wilson snarled. "I will not negotiate with savages." But Sarah could see the fear in the soldiers' eyes. They had expected to capture a wounded Apache and a defenseless woman. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a deadly standoff. "Governor Wilson," Geronimo said formally, "I offer you a trade. Let Dr. Sarah go free, and I will surrender myself to you without a fight." "No," Sarah protested. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself. "And I will not let an innocent woman die for my sins," Geronimo replied. The standoff stretched taut like a bowstring ready to snap. Outside, Apache warriors waited for a signal from their leader. Inside, nervous soldiers held their rifles with sweating hands. Governor Wilson looked around the clinic, calculating his options. He had come expecting an easy victory and political glory. Instead, he faced a situation that could end with his death and the creation of a legend. "You have 1 minute to decide," Nige called from outside. "Release them, or we open fire." Wilson's political ambitions warred with his survival instincts. Sarah could see him weighing the odds, trying to find a way to claim victory without getting killed. Finally, he spoke. "I want to hear Geronimo's terms." As negotiations began in the lamplight of her clinic, Sarah realized that nothing would ever be the same. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer just a doctor treating patients. She was a woman who had chosen love over fear, compassion over prejudice, and that choice was about to determine whether she lived or died. "My terms are simple," Geronimo said, his voice cutting through the deadly silence. "Dr. Sarah goes free. No charges, no persecution. In exchange, I surrender without bloodshed." Governor Wilson's eyes gleamed with greedy calculation. "And why should I trust the word of a savage who has broken every treaty he's ever signed?" "Because, unlike your government, when I give my word, I keep it," Geronimo replied coldly. Sarah stepped forward, her medical bag clutched in her white-knuckled hands. "I refuse these terms. I won't be saved at the cost of an innocent man's life." "Innocent," Wilson laughed harshly. "This animal has killed more Americans than cholera." "This man," Sarah emphasized, "has been fighting to protect his family from extermination. What would you do if foreign soldiers invaded your home and murdered your children?" Wilson's face twisted with rage. "Captain Hayes, gag this woman. She's clearly been brainwashed by Apache propaganda." But before Hayes could move, gunfire erupted outside. Not the controlled volleys of a battle, but sporadic shots and screaming. "What the hell?" Wilson spun toward the window. Through the glass, they could see chaos in the street. More Apache warriors had arrived, but they weren't attacking the soldiers. They were fighting other Apache. A second group that had apparently followed them to the clinic. "Chiricahua Apache," one of the soldiers outside shouted. "But they're fighting each other." Nietzsche's voice rang out in desperate Apache, then switched to English. "Uncle, Victorio's scouts have found us. They seek the bounty." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Bounty?" Geronimo's face darkened like a gathering storm. "Some Apache have been corrupted by your government's gold. They hunt their own people for reward money." Through the window, Sarah watched in horror as Apache warriors battled each other in her clinic's front yard. The cavalry soldiers, caught between two warring groups, fired at anyone who came too close. "This is perfect," Wilson said with sick satisfaction. "Let the savages kill each other. We'll collect the survivors." But his confidence evaporated when a new voice shouted from the darkness, speaking perfect English with a cultured Eastern accent. "Governor Wilson! This is Colonel James Mackenzie, 3rd Colorado Cavalry. You are interfering with a federal military operation." Wilson's face went white. "Mackenzie? What is he doing here?" "Sir," Captain Hayes whispered urgently, "Colonel Mackenzie has direct orders from Washington. If he's claiming jurisdiction—" "I don't care about his jurisdiction," Wilson snarled, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. Colonel Mackenzie rode into the lamplight, a distinguished man in his 50s, with silver hair and intelligent eyes. Behind him came 20 federal soldiers, their uniforms crisp and their discipline evident. "Governor Wilson," Mackenzie called through the window, "by order of General Sheridan, I am taking custody of the Apache known as Geronimo. Release him immediately." "Like hell I will," Wilson shouted back. "I have territorial authority here." "Not anymore," Mackenzie replied calmly. "President Grant himself has ordered Geronimo's transfer to federal custody. Step aside, Governor." Sarah looked between the two groups of soldiers, her mind racing. Federal versus territorial authority. This wasn't about justice. It was about politics and who would claim credit for Geronimo's capture. "What does this mean?" she whispered to Geronimo. "It means the game has changed," he replied grimly. "The federal government wants to parade me in Washington before they execute me. Better for their image than a territorial hanging." Outside, the battle between Apache factions was intensifying. Sarah could see wounded men from both sides, their blood staining the mud. Her medical instincts screamed at her to help them, but she was trapped in the standoff. "Colonel Mackenzie," Wilson called out, "I captured Geronimo first. Territorial law gives me authority." "Territorial law is superseded by federal mandate," Mackenzie replied. "Stand down, Governor, or face court-martial for disobeying direct orders." Wilson's face purpled with rage. He had come expecting political glory and found himself outmaneuvered by federal politics. "Sir," Captain Hayes said quietly, "we should comply. Mackenzie has the authority." But Wilson's political ambitions overrode his common sense. "No, I will not be robbed of my prize." He turned to his soldiers. "Arrest Geronimo and the doctor. Anyone who interferes will be shot for treason." Sarah watched in amazement as the territorial soldiers hesitated. They were caught between conflicting orders from superior officers, and none of them wanted to start a shooting war with federal troops. "Governor Wilson," Colonel Mackenzie's voice carried the authority of years of command, "you have 10 seconds to stand down before I arrest you for obstruction of federal justice." The standoff had become a three-way nightmare. Territorial soldiers faced federal soldiers, while Apache warriors battled each other in the background. And in the center of it all, Sarah stood, protecting the most wanted man in America. "Enough!" Geronimo's voice cut through the chaos with commanding authority. "I will not see more blood spilled over my capture." He stepped toward the door, but Sarah blocked his path. "No," she said firmly, "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for political games." "Sarah," Geronimo said gently, "you have done enough. More than enough." "Have I?" Sarah's eyes blazed with determination. "Because I'm just getting started." She turned to face Colonel Mackenzie through the window. "Colonel, I am Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I demand to speak with you under flag of truce." Mackenzie looked surprised. "Doctor, this is a military matter." "This is a medical matter," Sarah interrupted. "I am treating wounded patients, and I claim sanctuary under the Geneva Convention." Wilson laughed bitterly. "The Geneva Convention doesn't apply to savages, you stupid woman." "Actually," Colonel Mackenzie said thoughtfully, "Dr. Mitchell raises an interesting point. The federal government has been moving toward recognizing certain international medical protocols." "You can't be serious," Wilson exploded. "Dead serious," Mackenzie replied. "Doctor, I'm willing to discuss terms under medical sanctuary, but first, I need Geronimo to show himself peacefully." Sarah looked at Geronimo, seeing the weight of impossible choices in his eyes. He could surrender to Wilson and face a territorial hanging. He could surrender to Mackenzie and face federal execution. Or he could fight and die, taking her with him. "There is a fourth option," Geronimo said quietly, reading her thoughts. "What? You could come with me." Sarah's heart stopped. "What?" "My people are free in the mountains. You have shown such courage, such compassion for us. You could practice medicine among the Apache, help our children who are sick, our warriors who are wounded." The offer hung in the air like a revelation. Sarah could abandon her old life, leave behind the prejudice and hatred of white society, and find purpose among people who would value her skills and respect her courage. "Think about it, Sarah," Geronimo continued. "What future do you have here? Even if we escape tonight, you will always be watched, always suspected of Apache sympathies. Your practice will be ruined." He was right. Sarah realized that regardless of tonight's outcome, her life in Cedar Ridge was over. She had crossed too many lines, defied too much authority. "But your people," she said uncertainly, "would they accept a white woman?" "They would accept the woman who saved their leader's life," Geronimo said with certainty. "You would be honored among us." Outside, Colonel Mackenzie was growing impatient. "Dr. Mitchell, I need an answer. Will you surrender Geronimo to federal custody?" Sarah looked into Geronimo's eyes and saw something that made her decision. Not just respect or gratitude, but something deeper, something that had grown between them during their brief time together, a connection that transcended race and conflict. "Colonel Mackenzie," Sarah called out, "I need 5 minutes to stabilize my patient before any transfer." "Granted," Mackenzie replied, "but no tricks, Doctor." Sarah turned back to Geronimo, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what she was considering. "If I came with you, what would happen to us?" "I don't know," Geronimo admitted. "The path of the Apache is hard. We have little food, few medicines, constant danger, but we have something your civilization lacks." "What?" "Freedom. The freedom to live according to our own values, to choose our own destiny." Sarah thought of her lonely life in Cedar Ridge, the suspicious looks from townspeople, the isolation of being an educated woman in a frontier town. Then she thought of the Apache warriors she had treated tonight, men fighting to protect their families, their way of life. "How would we escape?" she asked. Geronimo smiled grimly. "The same way Apache have always escaped from impossible situations. We disappear into the night. But your wound will heal faster in the mountain air than in a federal prison," Geronimo said. "Sarah, I am offering you a choice. Stay and face inevitable persecution for helping me, or come and find a new life among people who understand the value of courage." Outside, the sound of fighting was beginning to diminish. Soon, one faction or another would win, and the standoff would be resolved. Sarah had perhaps 2 minutes to make the most important decision of her life. She looked around her clinic, the life she had built, the civilized world she had tried to serve. Then she looked at Geronimo, seeing not the savage of newspaper stories, but a man of honor who had shown her a different way of understanding justice and humanity. "Dr. Mitchell," Colonel Mackenzie called. "Time's up. Open the door." Sarah made her choice. She grabbed her medical bag and moved toward the back of the clinic where a small window led to the rear alley. "Are you sure about this?" Geronimo asked, following her. "No," Sarah admitted, "but I'm sure about you." As they reached the window, Sarah heard the front door burst open. Soldiers poured into the clinic, finding nothing but empty examination beds and the lingering scent of carbolic acid. "They're gone!" Wilson screamed. "Search everywhere!" But Geronimo and Sarah were already slipping through the darkness toward the horses Nietzsche had hidden in the alley. Behind them, their old lives disappeared into the night. Ahead lay the unknown, freedom and danger in equal measure, but freedom nonetheless. As they mounted the horses and rode toward the mountains, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before, the exhilarating terror of absolute freedom. She was no longer Dr. Sarah Mitchell, respectable frontier physician. She was a woman in love with the most wanted man in America, riding toward a destiny neither of them could predict. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell was dead. At least, that's what the wanted posters claimed. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, traitor and Apache accomplice, presumed dead. The bounty hunters had given up searching. The army had moved on to other targets. The newspapers had found new scandals to fill their pages. But high in the Dragoon Mountains, in a hidden Apache camp where eagles soared and ancient spirits whispered through the pines, Sarah was more alive than she had ever been. "Hold still," she murmured in Apache, carefully stitching a young warrior's knife wound. "This will heal better if you don't fidget like a restless child," the warrior grinned, his pain forgotten at her gentle teasing. "Yes, medicine woman. Medicine woman, that's what they called her now. Not Dr. Mitchell, not the white woman, but medicine woman. A title of honor earned through countless nights treating Apache wounded, delivering Apache babies, and proving her loyalty beyond any doubt. "How does it look?" Geronimo asked, approaching their makeshift medical shelter. His own wound had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar to mark their first meeting. "He'll live to fight another day," Sarah replied, cleaning her hands in a basin of mountain water, "though I wish there was less fighting and more living." Geronimo's expression grew somber. "The army has increased patrols again. They're pushing deeper into the mountains, trying to starve us out." Sarah had learned the harsh realities of Apache life over the past months. Constant movement, always staying ahead of pursuing soldiers. Food scarce enough that every meal was precious. Medicine limited to what they could gather from wild plants or steal from settlements. Yet, despite the hardships, she had never regretted her choice. "Naiche wants to speak with us," Geronimo continued. "There's been news from the valley." They walked together through the camp, past wiki-ups where Apache families lived in temporary harmony. Children played with quiet intensity, already learning that survival meant silence. Women worked on crafts while keeping rifles within reach. Warriors maintained weapons while sharing stories of their homeland. Sarah had become part of this community in ways she never expected. Her medical skills made her invaluable, but it was her courage and compassion that earned her true acceptance. She had learned to speak Apache fluently, to track game through mountain trails, to distinguish between dozens of useful plants. More importantly, she had learned to see the world through Apache eyes. "Medicine woman," called an elderly Apache woman, "my grandson's fever has broken. The herbs you prepared saved his life." "The mountain spirits guided my hands," Sarah replied in the traditional way, though she knew it was her training at Boston Medical School that had made the difference. In the council area, Naiche waited with grim news. "Uncle, the soldiers have captured Running Horse and his family. They're being taken to San Carlos Reservation." Sarah's heart sank. Running Horse was one of the kindest men in their band, a father of 4 young children. "What are his chances?" she asked. Naiche's face was stone. "The reservation is slow death, disease, starvation, despair. His children will not live to see adulthood." "Then we have to rescue them," Sarah said immediately. The Apache warriors looked at her with surprise. Even after months among them, her willingness to risk everything for Apache lives still amazed them. "It would be suicide," Naiche said. "The reservation is heavily guarded." "Since when do Apache fear suicide missions?" Sarah challenged. "You've been launching impossible raids for years." Geronimo studied her face, seeing the determination there. "You have a plan, medicine woman." "I do," Sarah said, her mind racing. "But it requires me to become Sarah Mitchell again." The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Sarah would return to civilization, claiming to have escaped from Apache captivity after months of torture and brainwashing. She would volunteer to serve as a doctor at San Carlos Reservation, positioning herself to help from within. "It's too dangerous," Geronimo protested when she explained. "If they suspect you're still loyal to us." "They won't," Sarah said confidently. "I'll give them what they want to hear. Stories of Apache brutality, tales of forced captivity, gratitude for my rescue. They'll see me as a victim, not a threat." "And if you're wrong?" Sarah took his hands in hers, feeling the calluses earned through a lifetime of fighting. "Then I'll die, knowing I tried to save innocent children." That night, as the camp slept under a canopy of desert stars, Sarah and Geronimo sat together by a small fire, knowing this might be their last peaceful moment for months. "I never thanked you," Sarah said quietly. "For what?" "For showing me who I really am." She looked into the flames, remembering the lonely doctor who had opened her clinic door 6 months ago. "I thought I was helping people in Cedar Ridge, but I was just maintaining a system that crushes the innocent." "You were always a healer, Sarah. I just helped you see bigger wounds that needed healing. Will you wait for me?" she asked, voicing the fear that had haunted her for days. Geronimo smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I waited 40 years for you without knowing you existed. I can wait a few more months knowing you're coming back. And if I don't come back, then I will find you, in this life or the next." The next morning, Sarah transformed herself back into doctor. Sarah Mitchell, kidnapped victim and traumatized survivor. She rubbed dirt into her hair, tore her clothes strategically, and practiced the haunted expression of someone who had endured months of captivity. The hardest part was saying goodbye. "Remember," Geronimo told her as they prepared to part, "you are Apache now. That means you never surrender, never give up hope, and never forget that freedom is worth any price." Sarah nodded, committing his face to memory. Then she walked alone toward the valley, leaving her heart in the mountains. 3 days later, a bedraggled woman stumbled into Fort Bowie, claiming to be the missing Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Her story of escape from Apache captivity made headlines across the territory. "Brave doctor survives Apache hell," the newspapers proclaimed. "Heroic woman endures months of savage torture." The interviews were painful, but necessary. Sarah forced herself to describe fictional brutalities, invented stories of Apache cruelty, and played the role of grateful victim. Each lie burned her throat, but she thought of running horses' children and found the strength to continue. Within 2 weeks, she had convinced the authorities of her loyalty and secured a position as chief medical officer at San Carlos Reservation. The reservation was exactly as horrible as Nietzsche had described. Thousands of Apache crowded into inadequate housing, surviving on spoiled government rations, while corrupt agents sold the good supplies for personal profit. Disease ran rampant through the camps, and children died daily from preventable illnesses. Sarah threw herself into the work, treating patients while secretly planning rescue operations. She identified sympathetic guards, mapped patrol schedules, and established communication networks with Apache families. But the hardest part was maintaining her cover while watching the systematic destruction of Apache culture. "Dr. Mitchell," the reservation commander said during one of their weekly meetings, "I'm concerned about your empathy for these people. Remember, they're not really human like us." Sarah smiled sweetly while imagining how Geronimo would deal with this man. "Of course, Commander. I just believe that healthy Indians are easier to manage than sick ones." Months passed. Sarah saved dozens of Apache lives through her medical work while secretly organizing resistance networks. She helped families escape, smuggled medicine to hidden camps, and passed intelligence about army movements. Then, one night, everything changed. "Doctor," whispered a young Apache woman during a routine medical exam, "there is someone who wants to see you, someone from the mountains." Sarah's heart raced. "Who?" "The one whose heart beats with yours." That night, Sarah slipped away from her quarters and walked to a prearranged meeting spot near the reservation boundary. In the moonlight, she saw a familiar figure waiting. "Hello, medicine woman," Geronimo said softly. Sarah ran to him, and for a moment the harsh realities of their situation faded away. She was just a woman, reunited with the man she loved. "Why did you come?" she whispered. "It's too dangerous." "Because tomorrow we leave this place forever," Geronimo replied. "All of us. The entire reservation." "What do you mean?" "We're taking everyone, Sarah. Every man, woman, and child who wants to be free. We've been planning it for months, and tomorrow night we execute the largest escape in Apache history." Sarah's mind reeled. "The army will pursue you. Thousands of soldiers." "Let them come," Geronimo said grimly. "We have something they don't. The righteousness of our cause, and the woman who taught us that some white people understand justice." "How can I help?" "By being exactly where you are. When chaos erupts tomorrow night, you'll be in position to help the families with children and elderly escape safely." "But Sarah," his voice grew serious, "after tomorrow, there's no going back. We'll be fugitives forever." "We've been fugitives since the night I chose you over my old life," Sarah replied. "I'm not afraid." The next evening, as the sun set over San Carlos Reservation, Sarah made her final preparations. Hidden in her medical supplies were extra bandages, medicine, and emergency supplies for the journey ahead. At exactly midnight, Geronimo's signal echoed across the reservation, the cry of a nighthawk that no actual bird had ever made. The great escape began. Apache families emerged from their quarters, moving with practiced silence toward predetermined rally points. Sarah guided the most vulnerable, pregnant women, children, and elderly, through routes she had mapped during her months of medical rounds. "This way," she whispered to a family with 3 small children. "Stay quiet and stay together." Behind them, guards were finally realizing something was wrong. Shouts rang out, followed by gunfire as the few remaining Apache warriors engaged in diversionary attacks. "Dr. Mitchell!" someone called. "Where are you going?" Sarah turned to see Commander Williams approaching with several soldiers. Her heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, I'm evacuating patients to the medical bunker. There seems to be some kind of Apache uprising." Williams looked suspicious. "Those aren't patients, Doctor. Those are escaping prisoners." Sarah's cover was blown. In that moment of crisis, she made the choice that defined her forever. "Yes," she said calmly, "they are. And I'm helping them escape." Before Williams could react, Apache warriors emerged from the darkness around them. Sarah dove for cover as gunfire erupted, crawling towards safety while bullets whined overhead. "Sarah!" Geronimo's voice cut through the chaos. "This way!" She ran toward him, leaving behind her final pretense of belonging to the white world. Behind her, the reservation burned as Apache families fled toward freedom. "Are you hurt?" Geronimo asked, pulling her onto his horse. "No," Sarah gasped, "but I think I just declared war on the United States government." "Welcome to the family," Geronimo replied with a fierce grin. As they rode toward the mountains, Sarah looked back once at the blazing reservation. Somewhere in that fire, Dr. Sarah Mitchell finally died completely. In her place rode Medicine Woman, Apache healer and partner to the greatest warrior leader in history. The war for Apache freedom had begun, and this time they had a secret weapon the army would never expect. A white woman who understood that some causes were worth dying for, but more importantly, causes worth living for. As dawn broke over the Dragoon Mountains, painting the peaks in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah realized she had found something more precious than safety or respectability. She had found her true home, and she would fight for it until her last breath. If you enjoyed this story of love, courage, and freedom, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what region you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more incredible historical stories to life.